morning. I'd like to welcome all of you to this Amador County Master Gardener's public education class. I am glad you could join me today, and I hope that you're able to take away something from this which will be helpful to you as you pursue your own garden project. My name, as Ed said, is Brian Eagleson, and the title of my talk today is Eyesore to Eye Candy, One Gardener's Front Yard Garden Journey. Next slide, and I'll try to remember to say that. As for my background, I became a master gardener in April 2019. During our first year as a master gardener, we are called sprouts. I still consider myself a bit of a sprout. I should mention that in my profession that I am now retired from, I did from time to time give in-services to staff, and I learned it was helpful to interject humor from time to time. I should warn you, though, that puns are my favorite type of humor, and today's talk will include many garden puns. Because of this proclivity for puns, my friends have threatened to send me to the penitentiary. So with that said, let us get started. Oh, and because this is presented in a Zoom format, I will not be able to hear any of your groans as a reaction to my humor. Let me mention the reason for my giving this talk. As Ed alluded to, my topic today covers the year I spent working on my front yard, creating the garden that I envisioned. I will share the process that I went through to create it, the joys along with the frustrations and mistakes. My project really was a bit of trial and error. Oh, in the future, I will warn you when a pun is coming. There are several things that I will mention for your consideration, which I hope will help you as you contemplate your own garden project. However, it is beyond the scope of this talk to go into detail on most of them. Pun time! I found a leak in my garden. It was irrigating, and it drove me plumb crazy. Okay, things to know or consider. There are several things to consider when starting such a project. Soil. Oh, and just so you know, we master gardeners never refer to it as dirt. Soil is defined as, quote, the natural medium on the surface of the earth composed of minerals, organic matter, water, air, and various organisms in which plants typically grow. Although this description is accurate, it's a bit of a snoozer, and that's the last definition I'm going to give. Anyway, there are essentially three types of soil: sandy, silt, and clay, and combinations of these. You need to know what type of soil you have, since this will affect the specific plant you grow, but also how the water will pass through it, which will ultimately impact the success of your project. My front yard garden soil was mostly silt, but with some clay, but more on this later. Climate zone. It's important to know this since, for example, it tells you what plants will typically do best in your area, or conversely, which not to plant. One of the commonly used guides is Sunset Magazine. My zone here in Jackson, I believe, is zone 7. Topography. Is your yard flat? Does it slope? Is it hilly? The topography can affect, among other things, water drainage or how much sun or shade your plants will get. The left side of my garden is relatively flat, but the right side of the garden slopes. Pun time! Bad gardeners are rough around the hedges. Orientation to the sun. Will your garden get morning sun, midday, afternoon, or all-day sun? This will affect what plants you choose based on their needs. Also, how intense will the sun be? Reflection is another factor to consider. For example, heat being reflected off of a surface such as stucco or wood siding of your house. My garden gets mostly mid-morning through afternoon sun. Water source. Are you on a municipal well? A municipal water source or a well? If on a municipal source, cost is likely the factor to be considered. I am on Jackson Water and cost is certainly something I must deal with. Existing plants. Are there existing plants or trees? Will any or all of them need to be cut back or removed completely to make room? Give a lot of thought to whether you want to keep something when planting. Fun time again. Don't tell secrets in cornfields. There are ears everywhere. Next slide. Planning your dream garden. First, know your style. Know what your style is. A structured garden, free-flowing. I prefer a structured garden look myself. Wish list. You are planning your dream garden, so dream. What do you wish to have in it? Draw it out. I do not expect you to be able to read this well, but I'm showing it as an example. I measured the space I had in my front yard, including such things as sidewalk, walkway, porch, fencing. I then took a large piece of graph paper and drew it out. I placed what plants and tree I wanted and where I thought I wanted them. Keep in mind that your first layout may not be your last. It certainly wasn't mine. As you do your research, you likely will find that things will change. I have a concrete walkway. I had areas that were severely cracked as well as a poor design. Being a retired physical therapist, I would have preferred an aesthetically pleasing ramp, but due to the small area, space would not allow this. So I had to design a walkway that would be much more manageable, say using a walker or crutches, either for a guest or, who knows, myself recovering from some future surgery. Next, I wanted a fence with an arbor and a gate. I wanted more privacy. Fun time when gardening. Try to herb your enthusiasm. Oof, next slide. Research. Do your research. There is a plethora of websites to help you. I'm sure it is not surprising to you that I strongly recommend the websites which the University of California provides. And now for a commercial message. The information contained in the University of California websites is all research-based. End of commercial. Individual plant requirements. Size. When the plant or tree are at full height or width, will it fit in or perhaps take over other items you plan to plant or just be too big for the space? Water needs. Are you considering drought-tolerant plants? We are, after all, in a drought. Growth versus thrive. Will the plant or tree not just grow, but will it thrive in your area or where you plan to put it? Native versus non-native. I encourage their use, but do remember that just because a plant is listed as a native does not mean that all natives will thrive in your area. Best location. Give thought to each plant's location. For example, you might have a plant you want to see out of a living room window or a kitchen window. Color. Many gardeners want lots of color in their garden. Check to see if there is a variety of the plant you want. Is there a different color available than what you first see at your local nursery? Fragrance. Fragrance is also a biggie. Many choices here. There is nothing like having a fragrant plant to smell while sitting near or in your garden or through an open window. Next slide. Pollination attractors. See if what you want to plant will also attract bees and birds. Material to separate sections of your garden. There are many options here, such as bender board, wood or plastic, concrete blocks, rocks, etc. Mulch and gravel. Mulch will keep weeds down and conserve your water. Gravel, which comes in a variety of sizes and colors, can be useful also. For example, if you are considering planting lavender, pea gravel is something that they love. Pun time! As the weed was sprayed with poison, it cried out, "This'll be the death of me." Next slide. Keeping in mind, if I have gained any gardening wisdom in the last year, it is these three things. One, you can always change your mind. For example, at any point, you can remove a plant and put in something else. Two, expect the unexpected. It is not an if it will happen. It is a when it will happen. I guarantee it. Three, when in doubt, give it a chance. I will have examples of these as I finally get around to showing you how my garden came into being. Next slide. This is a picture of my front yard when I bought the house. The house sat on the market for a year before I purchased it. What I did not realize at the time was that someone was coming to regularly water the sod lawn because there was no sprinkler system. I was living out of the area and could only come down every 3 or 4 weeks, and so the lawn died. But that was fine by me because I planned to take it out anyway. Next slide. What I did not plan on was that the following winter, there would be heavy rains, and the following spring, instead of a lawn, I got a weed garden. This is a picture of the front yard with weeds, just as I was starting the project. It actually looked a lot worse than this prior to the photo. Next slide. This shows how it looked after some weeding. The white plastic bags over there on the right, upper of the photo, are the zebra grasses that were given to me by a fellow master gardener. The grasses stayed in those bags for over 6 months before I planted them. That they ended up as flourishing is, to me, a bit of a miracle. Next slide. And this shows the soil clear of weeds, or so I thought. Fun time is doing online gardening research, turfing the net. Next slide. It seemed obvious to me that I had to first replace the cement walkway leading up to the porch. Next slide. And here are some additional pictures of how that progressed. One thing to point out, you may not be able to see it, but in the bottom right photo, there is a small plastic pipe coming out of the cement on the left side. I ran a number of plastic pipes under the concrete walkway, which were to allow the lines for the drip system I planned to install. Due to other financial priorities, I've not been able to put the drip system in yet, but still plan to do so. That is why there will be no other slides or discussion of it. Next slide. Next, the arbor I chose was installed along with the new mailbox. Next slide. Then came work on installing the fencing. I chose a plastic arbor and fencing because I wanted it to last a long time, and I did not want to be sanding and refinishing wood ones in a future year. Next slide. It was time to start prepping for my soil for planting. What I'm about to describe, I would not expect that any of you would do. Because I had already found out that there were all sorts of stuff in my soil, I did the following. I borrowed a gold mining pan from a friend. I then shoveled soil into it. I shook it until all the dirt was filtered out, and then disposed of the debris. Next slide. Once I had the soil pile large enough and had a hole big enough, I filled it in with the filtered soil. I went section by section. Seriously, this took forever. But what I had after doing this was a wonderful soil for planting, to which I added good organic planting mix. Next slide. Besides the usual stuff I expected to find, rocks that you would expect to find in Amador County soil, I also found nails, glass, pieces of pottery, children's toys, and this, a metal chain ladder. Fun time! I dropped a bottle of catsup on my foot, and it caused immense pain. Tomatoes. Okay, and next slide. Next, it was time to start forming the boundaries and planting sections of the garden. Of all the options available, I decided on rocks to form my garden sections. It was an easy decision since they were readily available and plenty of them. Plus, I felt it gave my garden a more natural look. I had several large rocks. Most of them came from my roughly 1/4 acre property. I used these rocks, for example, to create a pathway from the walkway over to the mailbox. That was what you see in the top right photo. As for the large rocks that I found, I featured them as seen in the 2 lower photographs. Next slide. I started to plant my zebra grasses along with some festicas. For those of you who are not familiar with zebra grasses, the left slide is the reason they have that name. They're just beautiful. This is another adjacent section on the right that I worked on, and it is also an example of how I changed my design. Originally, I was going to plant more phlox in the narrow strip to the left of the walkway, but I changed my mind in order to have more room to make it easier to do future weeding and maintenance. Oh, and by the way, in that same slide on the right, you can see part of the white PVC pipe coming out. That's for the still to be future drip system. Next slide. I put weed cloth down and covered it with pea gravel. I will have a comment to make about weed cloth later in the talk. Here, more pea gravel going in. This section is almost complete, except for the planting of the lavender. The 2 front sections by the front fence are where lavender plants would go. Oh, speaking of lavender, I had planned on using the hip coat variety. However, due to the pandemic, there was none available, and all I could get was Spanish lavender. Pun time! In the garden, there is never a dill moment. Next slide. This is a shot of the right side of the garden, the front garden. As you can see in the left slide, on the left side of the bottom photo, 3 erigeron have been planted along the walkway. Next slide. Now it was time to get to work on the other side of the garden, the uphill side. Rock border went in, a large rock as a stepping stone, which you can see there in the photo, and erigeron were planted along the walkway and by the arbor post. Next slide. Here, a rock in the top 2 photos, a rock border was again created and additional stepping stones that would eventually lead to the tree I would plant. Weed cloth was again put down, then pea gravel and more stepping stones. I needed access to the far side of the yard. So as you can see in the bottom left photo, large stepping stones were again placed just down from the corner of the porch, and a festica plant next to the grapevine. Adjacent to this, more rock borders were created, as well as planting these zebra grasses. Weed cloth and pea gravel again used in the area behind the grasses. Next slide. I started work on the uphill side of the garden in the area in front of the cyclone fence, which borders the property. 4 panels of plastic lattice were then attached to the fence to give me privacy from my neighbor's driveway. Next slide. My garden plan included a concrete platform in which I would place a table that I still have to build to allow me to sit in my garden and have coffee or a meal. To accomplish this, the area was leveled, wood forms made and laid down, and rebar added. The bottom photo is the completed platform. Next slide. The crepe myrtle tree. It was time to start digging the hole to put my crepe myrtle tree in, which would be centered in this side of the garden. I noticed as I progressed that I encountered more rock. My design was to feature the tree. It had to be planted in this specific spot. Early in this presentation, when I said to expect the unexpected, this is what I meant. Well, what I did not plan on was running into nothing but rock. Because I knew I would be putting the tree into an area that could limit its roots from spreading out, I spent about 6 hours digging away to remove enough of them to create a hole 3 feet square and 3 feet deep. I'm sorry I don't have a picture of the hole, but after digging it, I was too tired to take one. Now, it is recommended that when you plant a tree, the hole should be, at a minimum, at least double the width of the container it is in. That was not a problem. However, in reference to how deep, it is recommended that it only be as deep as the container. The rationale is that if you go deeper, you risk that the soil will settle underneath the tree and the tree would sink, thus risking what is called root rot when you watered. I took a chance. Earlier, I had said, when in doubt, give it a chance. The tree itself is what I was thinking of when I said that. I went to my local nursery and I bought the last crepe myrtle they had. I felt lucky. It was the white Natchez variety that I wanted. By the way, I chose white because every crepe myrtle in my neighborhood was pink, and I just wanted something different. Because of the pandemic had made the odds of finding what I wanted almost nil, I bought it. However, there was a reason it was the last tree left. It had only a few leaves on it, but worse, when you placed the container on a level surface, the trunk was leaning over about 20 degrees. For those of you who remember what a Charlie Brown Christmas tree is, this is what I had. When I planted it, I did so that the trunk was upright. The left photo is the tree with granite rocks as a border. I did not know if it would survive the winter, but I was hopeful. By the beginning of April, however, I was concerned. By mid-April, I was contemplating digging it up and seeing if I could replace it. A friend suggested that I give it a chance and wait. I did. On April 28th, I thought I saw something that might be a bud. So I grabbed my magnifying glass and sure enough, it was starting to come to life. The photo on the right is what it looked like on May 13th. I am so glad I gave it a chance. Fun time. When Santa is in the garden, he frequently can be heard to say, ho, ho, ho. Next slide. The area between the concrete platform and the front fence is where I ran into further problems. I not only ran into, yes, more rock, but a pocket of clay soil as well. To test it for drainage before planting what I wanted there, I dug a hole and filled it in with water. I waited and waited and waited, but the water was never absorbed. Since it was getting dark, I thought I would check it in the morning. This is what greeted me the next day. This is another example of expect the unexpected, and you can always change your mind. I filled in the hole with soil and put a large pot on the spot until I could decide what I might want to grow in it. Next slide. Okay, one more example of expect the unexpected. I planted 2 star jasmine plants against the lattice fencing on either side of the concrete platform. As you can see in the left photo, the one closest to the street did very well. The one on the other side also did until over a 2-day period, it died. The right photo, as you see, it was a mystery to me why it died so quickly. I did nothing. I did notice that my neighbor had weed whacked his area on the other side of the cyclone fencing just prior to that, and I wondered if he had used some weed killer and had oversprayed into my plant. I checked and he had not. It was then that the light bulb in my head came on. Days before, I noticed there were mole or gopher tracks under the soil. The critter must have eaten the roots of it. Why was the other plant spared? It was then the other light bulb came on my head. With the concrete slab, clay soil, and rocky area around it, the creature probably could not reach it. Mysteries solved, and Providence smiled upon me and the critter left, perhaps out of frustration. Next slide. More challenges. Borrowing a line from Shakespeare, this next topic fits into the category of the best laid plans of mice and gardeners oft go awry. Rye? Weeds. Despite my weed cloth, pea gravel, and later putting mulch around the plants, I still had weeds. They came up at the edges of the weed barrier. They also start from seeds that land on top of the weed barrier, which are 2 of the negatives to using it, and why the University of California no longer recommends its use. Pun time. If a plant is sad, do the other plants photosympathize with it? Okay, next slide. Garden accessories. I'm going to talk about what I call garden accessories, which I really think of as garden art. These are items that you can consider adding to your garden project that I feel will enhance it. Some just make it more decorative and attractive, while there are others that can actually help your garden plants. Arbors add a lot to a garden. Besides the one at my front yard, the top right photo shows the one that I added at the top of the side yard, as well as leftover piece of fencing to block the view of that side and keep the focus on the garden. Here on the bottom left, you can see the grapevine filling in that metal arbor. The bottom right is another piece of leftover fence, which I attached to the front porch. Next slide. Adding a bird bath or a bird house can attract birds for you to enjoy, and they can be additional pollinators. I was given an old birdhouse which needed cleaning and repair. I did that and then put a couple of coats of sealant on it and attached it to an antique lamp base. In the bottom left photo hung a bird feeder from a decorative hook. And on the bottom right, I used a broken metal hook and hung a candle holder from it. Next slide. Has seen in other photos, rocks can be used for practical reasons, i.e. borders or creating a path, but they also can serve an aesthetic sense as well. Creating areas in the garden where you can be more immersed in it was my idea for a table, which I mentioned before. On the left photo, the big blue, it is literally blue, granite rock also serves as an umbrella stand, which will shade my future table and chairs, which you can see on the right. Pun time! I started planting my herbs in alphabetical order. Friends ask me how I found the time. I tell them, it's easy. It's next to the sage. Okay. My front porch, I hope I said next slide. Good. My front porch is set up to allow me to view the garden as a relax in a rocker or a wicker chair with a cup of coffee and read or just sit and enjoy the view. My side porch in the bottom photo there also acts as a haven. I can sit at this small table when it's too warm or too cold out to be in the garden. Next slide. For more privacy on the side porch, I added matchstick blinds and even used grapevine to allow additional privacy by running thin wires between the posts and allowing the vines to grow along them. Next slide. I have several plants on the porch. Most are succulents, as you can see in the photographs. Next slide. In the bottom left picture, there is one atop a wine barrel. The bottom right shows a small tree in a pot. Next slide. And finally, now some pictures of my front garden today. As you look at the left photo, that's my grapevine in full regalia. Down the bottom left of that same photo is my lavender. On the right, bottom left of that is the Erigeron that I planted on both sides of the walkway leading to the house. And it is just taken off. It's amazing. Let's see, what else? If you look more to the right side and up below where the hosing is, it's probably hard to see, but I have a rosemary plant there. In the middle, that's a red hot poker. And then the bottom right, which really is taken off, is a scented geranium. It actually has the centinella type smell. And this is a subjective comment, but I really didn't notice any mosquitoes when I was sitting out on my porch this year. Maybe that's because of the drought and less water available, but I'll be looking to see if that's true in future years. Next slide. The zebra grasses. Sometimes I think I'm a victim of my own success. If I had known these were going to grow to the size that they were, I probably would have considered putting one less on each side of the front yard. I've had people look at these and tell me, holy cow, these are huge. And I agree, but I just don't have the heart to take anything out. So I will just live with their size. They do get a bit overgrown and hide some of the garden accessories, but Next slide. Here's a shot of the overall of the garden from the street. One thing to note, I mentioned how the Erigeron just really had taken off. In the photo there on the sidewalk to the left of the arbor, you can see a bunch of green. That is where the single Erigeron plant has grown, not only up onto the walkway, not only over to the mailbox, it has grown forward and out. And I've decided just to leave it there. Think it looks neat. Fun time. The advice given at the plant parenthood class was, if you don't want to propagate, keep your petals closed. Thankfully, that is the last pun. Or is it? Next slide. Besides enjoying my garden, one of the other pluses to sitting on my front porch is that the house across the street is set back so far that it looks like I have a park across the way to look out. Next slide. So, in summing up, when planning your garden, your dream garden, remember to, 1, consider the various aspects: soil, climate zone, topography, orientation to the sun, water source, and existing plants and structures. 2, know your style, create a wish list, draw it out, and remember to look at the big picture. 3, do your research. 4, and finally, remember, A, you can always change your mind. B, expect the unexpected. And C, when in doubt, give it a chance. Next slide. I have a partial list of websites that I hope you will find helpful, from what Master Gardener upcoming classes and events are happening in Amador County, to how to submit a gardening question for us to answer for you, to every bug or plant problem you can think of, to how to select the correct tree for your project, to irrigation issues, etc. Next slide. I want to thank Master Gardeners Doris Mosbach and Ed Bass for their technical support in helping me prepare for and during this Zoom event today. Without their help, I could not have done this. Also, thanks to the other Master Gardeners supporting today's class: Maureen, the Magnificent, the other Ed, who sounds so much like Walter Cronkite to me, actually, and finally, Tracy.